This is the video on revision. It will be short. You should see a small number when you look at running time at the bottom of the screen. And the reason why I want it to be short is because I think everybody has kind of a variety of things they're concerned about. I have a few things I want to highlight. What you really want to be spending your time doing between now and when the essays due is reading, rewriting, revising, editing, uh, showing your summary to someone you live with, or maybe showing it to your partner again if they want to look at it again. But it's really the time for individual work. There's a few things I can guide you toward, but I want to make sure that that you spend some time between now and when the essays due, revising, editing. I'll walk you through a few of those things. Note the deadline. There's been some adjustments. It is very, very important that everyone turn in an essay by the deadline. If something crazy happens, let me know. But what you don't want to do is just, I don't hear from you, I don't get an essay. That's a problem. A few of you did not turn in drafts and didn't participate in peer workshop. That's not ideal, but uh, if you miss a draft, if you miss a peer workshop, overall in the class, if you do other things, you're going to be fine. It's not a huge grade penalty. If you get a 0 for essay one, you really are going to start to have difficulties in terms of passing the course, and we don't want anyone to have to repeat CO 150. So no matter where you are, no matter what this experience has been like, no matter how good or bad you feel about your final product, turn in an essay by the deadline on Canvas. So what are things that people are concerned about and that you need to work on as you revise? I've communicated with several of you one-on-one. I have a face-to-face version of the same class. I've taught this assignment a few times, so I usually do have a pretty clear sense of kind of what the main points of concern are. I'm going to run through them very quickly, give you a few thoughts. There's still time to email me. Today is best. Tomorrow is good. As we get closer and closer to the deadline, right? The closer you get to that, the harder it is for me to have time to give you a really substantive response. Okay. So what are people concerned about? Making sure we discuss rhetorical elements in the summaries. Now, I have a whole video about this that I hope you watch. If not, go back and watch it. Uh, I, there's just a reminder here that sometimes we build up rhetorical elements to be a little bit more complicated than they are. They may in fact be quite simple. So if you think about the essay by Marty Blatt, who is his audience? Clearly he's writing to people who can make decisions, executives and decision makers. Your article might just be writing to people who go to parks. It might be um, writing to members of Congress. It might be writing to people who are concerned about conservation. There's a lot of different types of audiences. I think usually that one is fairly intuitive. What is the purpose? This one should be fairly clear too. And if you're still struggling with purpose, you may want to reread a little bit. So again, thinking about Marty Blatt. Marty Blatt is proposing a new national park. And here it helps to really think about the verb you want to use. Not just their writing, but what is their writing doing? Are they proposing, informing, persuading, critiquing, highlighting, exposing, promoting, celebrating, analyzing, criticizing? A good specific verb goes a long way there. What is the context? Students get hung up on this one quite a bit. What is going on in the world that the author is responding to, that the author wants their audience to think about? In Blatt's case, what was going on is there was a lack of MPS site devoted to Reconstruction. So whenever I don't have the date that the year that was published off the top of my head, there's lots of things going on. What he particularly wanted to call attention to was the lack of an MPS site devoted to Reconstruction. What does your writer want to call attention to? Climate change crisis, funding problems, the Great Recession, the growth of the national park system, problem with conservation related to X, right? What's the specific thing going on in the world that they want to call your attention to? And then style. Here's something where, again, students get hung up more than they need to. You know at this point what your writer is saying. How do they make the argument? Okay, they could have made it 10 different ways. How do they make it? And we're thinking really basic things here. In Blatt's case, Blatt uses a lot of historical research. Maybe your writer uses a lot of academic research. Maybe they use a lot of statistics and scientific studies. Maybe they don't use any of that stuff. Maybe it's personal stories. Maybe it's historical anecdotes. Maybe it's individual examples. One of these is a guy drives around all these different parks, right, and interviews people. when we're talking about style, that's what we're talking about. Just the basic kind of how do they go about writing what they're writing about. So I've talked about that a lot. I wanted to run through it again really quickly, but my main piece of advice there is don't overthink it. Don't think, that phrase rhetorical elements can sound a little abstract. These are pretty straightforward things I'm asking for. Again, if you're stuck, email me, ask a question. Okay, making sure our points are clear, making sure our wording is clear, always a big question. Here is the time when it's very helpful to share your work, even if it's just one of your summaries or something. It's one page, right? So anybody who's actually your friend, right, should be willing to read one page. So sharing it with somebody in this class, somebody who's not in this class actually might even be more helpful. And the test is read this summary. Hey, what do you think this article is about? Based on my summary, what do you think this article is about? What's confusing? Uh, that's what we're trying to do here. Explain this article to somebody who hasn't read it, who has no frame of reference for it. So the points where your reader's confused, those are what you want to address. And usually it's a matter of you using vague language. Maybe it might help to include some specific details or examples. But again, I think there's a really good way to test this since we're doing a summary. Does someone who has not read the article, can they figure out what you mean and what you're saying? Creating an effective dialogue in the synthesis, another concern that comes comes up quite a bit. Um, so the best thing I can say for this is I think a few people in their drafts. Again, I didn't respond to your drafts. I glanced at some of them. Mostly it's just not practical from my end to give comments on every draft. I think some of you in your drafts, you took one of the prompts from that worksheet. So and so would approve of so and so's plan because of whatever, right? And you just filled in the blanks, and then maybe you added a sentence or two. That is a fine place to start, but your synthesis should feel like a conversation. In other words, it shouldn't just feel like you're filling in a worksheet. Think about the people put these two authors in a room together. What are they going to talk about? Where are they going to agree? What are they going to disagree? What are they going to butt heads on? Where might they overlap? That worksheet is a good way to get you to brainstorm. You might fill in the blanks with some things, but I want those to start you off in a direction rather than be the final word. Okay, so if you felt really limited by the worksheet, or if that sounds like, oh yeah, I did just fill in the blanks and then write another sentence or two, that's where you may want to go back and just see, okay, well, what else might emerge from this conversation? Just see if you can add to it. Making sure the summary doesn't just jump around from point to point, that it has cohesion, and don't want to miss the big picture in the summary. Those two things are clearly related. And this, excuse me, again, is another good opportunity to take feedback from peer workshop. Did your partner seem to have a clear sense of what your article was about? Again, to show it to a friend or somebody you live with or something of that nature. Uh, Somebody in my class today said, how many details do I need, right? Or how many examples should I use, right? There's not some particular thing I'm looking for, that you have to have this much attention to the big picture, or it has to be organized in this way or whatever. It's whatever is appropriate to your article and whatever makes sense. So, if you're concerned about missing the big picture in the summary, go back and reread. Uh, you know, have somebody else read it, or just, make yourself try to read it through somebody else's eyes and ask yourself, do I just see a list of details here? Or do I get a sense of what the author's overall purpose is? If that's clear, then you probably have got the big picture and you've probably talked about the rhetorical element of purpose, right? So that's a really good thing. Double checking citations and works cited. So we have not spent, I haven't really given you resources on citations, works cited. I do want you to use MLA style for this, which is a fairly straightforward citation style. We are going to talk a lot about MLA style and MLA citations and just citation in general and research later in the semester. For this paper, it really is just a practice. You have two sources. Essentially what I want you to do is, Google MLA citation journal article and make a works cited just with the two sources. Just give it your best shot. If you include a works cited and you make a reasonable attempt here, that's great. I can promise you that you are not going to get your essay back. Your essay is not going to say, great summaries, really effective, great use of detail, clearly written, interesting thesis created or synthesis created a thoughtful conversation. Um, but your works cited, you put the title where the author was supposed to be, so you get a C minus. No, don't panic, don't freak out about the works cited. I want you to give it your best effort. If you have some things that you're confused on, I'll let you know. Then we'll really start working on those for the future essays. This is really just a practice, so that's not something you need to be anxious about. So everything on this list has been kind of big picture stuff other than the works cited and citations. I haven't talked about grammar. Uh, there's no real way to effectively do that for a class of students because every student has different grammatical issues. I've included a handout in this module that runs through some common issues that I've seen. But again, uh, we have really been thinking about summary and synthesis and some of these big picture things. I want your writing to be clear. I want to be able to understand what you're saying. I'm going to be looking for issues that get in the way of clarity. I am not, again, going to say excellent summary, excellent synthesis. You got your citations. You had 2 sentence fragments, C minus. Okay. If it was this kind of, if that was the kind of class it was going to be, I would have had different points of emphasis all during this module. We want to be really clear. I will point out to you where I see issues. If there are things I can't understand, right, that's a problem. But again, this is kind of more of this assignment is more a sense of trying to get a sense of where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, are there specific issues that you need to work on moving forward so that, okay, I point out, hey, you have an issue with sentence fragments. You don't want to have that issue on essay number 3, right? So I've given you a handout with some resources, some things that might be helpful. This is not to say that grammar doesn't matter. It's not to say that clarity doesn't matter. I want you to strive for that. But again, it's not something that you need to be tremendously anxious about. And there's a reason why we haven't spent a lot of time on it because I wanted to focus on these other elements. I hope this is helpful. I look forward to reading your work. Make sure you turn in an essay by the deadline on Canvas. As always, if you have questions, please let me know. Reach out over email. The sooner the better.